Hi and welcome to another story, and today we have part 8 of Hetty Feather by Jacqueline Wilson, continuing from chapter 17. The hospital cook scolded her hands badly with boiling water and could not work for weeks. Ida was asked to take over her duties until Cook recovered. She was allowed to choose one of us girls to help her in the kitchen. Ida selected the great 14-year-old girls at first, as expected, but then announced she liked to give some of the younger girls a chance. "I'd like to try out Hetty Feather for a day," she said. Matron Bottomley snorted derisively. "You'll regret that decision," she said, but she let Ida have her way. All the other girls moaned and grumbled and said it wasn't the slightest bit fair. I said nothing at all. I stayed silent when Ida set me to peeling the vegetables, freshly picked from the hospital garden. She told me to have a little nibble at the carrots and pod a few peas for myself, but I didn't bother. I even shook my head listlessly when she offered me a spoonful of syrup from her larder. You're always hungry, Hetty. Aren't you feeling well?" Ida said, putting her hand to my forehead. "I'm all right. Leave me alone," I said, shrugging her hand away. "Oh, Hetty, please, dear. Tell me what's wrong," said Ida. "Nothing," I snapped. "Stop pestering me." If I'd spoken like that to Miss Morley or Matron Bottomley, they'd have slapped me for impertinence, but Ida just looked wounded. Her big blue eyes blinked at me reproachfully. I felt bad because she had always been so very kind to me, but I was tired of being kind back. I'd spent weeks making a fuss of Eliza and listening to her endless prattle about Jem, when every word was a torment. I couldn't tell her to shut up and keep out of my way. She was my little sister, after all. I knew just how sad and lonely she was feeling, how very bleak the hospital seemed after our cosy cottage. When I'd first come here, it had meant so much to me that Harriet had made a special pet of me. I felt duty-bound to do the same for Eliza, even though the sound of her squeaky little voice made me wince, and her habit of quoting Jem in each and every sentence drove me to distraction. I had to stop myself hurting her, but I didn't see why I had to take such care with silly old Ida. I wish she wasn't so stupidly sensitive. She had spirit enough with the others. I'd seen her put Sheila in her place often enough, and she was wonderfully sharp with the nurses, even though forced to toady Matron Stinking Bottomley. Why did she have to care what I said? I sighed at her set shoulders and wounded expression. She was making pastry, thumping her rolling pin with unnecessary pressure. Ida had introduced pies into our diet while Cook recovered, and they were much appreciated by everyone. I idly picked up all the cut-off ribbons of pastry. I started to fashion them into a big fat dough lady. I turned her into a matron with a silly cap and a grim expression. Ida stopped making her endless huge pies and stared at my creation. She smiled, forgetting she was offended. "That's so good, Hetty." "No, it's not," I said, and I suddenly squashed the figure flat. "Oh, look what you've done. I wanted to make it to keep her. You're in a bad mood today, aren't you?" I shrugged and made patterns in the spilled flour on the kitchen flags with the toe of my boot. "Don't do that, you're just treading it in," said Ida. She took a deep breath, still unaccountably intent on humouring me. "How about your taking a turn with the pastry rolling?" "I don't want to." "It's a skill to be proud of, making good pastry. I've picked up a lot of knowledge working in the kitchen. I could teach you all sorts, Hetty. Maybe you could eventually get a position as a cook general if you learned a few recipes." "I don't want to be a cook general," I declared. "It's far better than being a kitchen maid or a tweenie. I don't want to be any kind of stupid servant," I said, "especially in a kitchen." This time I'd really gone too far. Ida flushed. She thumped the pastry with her rolling pin, and she looked as if she'd like to give me a good thumping too. "Oh, I'm all too well aware that you look down your nose at servants," said Ida. "So pray tell me, Hetty, what exactly are you going to do with your life?" I could not answer her. I had clung to the idea of marrying Jem for so long. Now I could see how painfully silly I had been. "What was it again?" said Ida angrily, putting her floury hand to her ear as if I'd spoken. "Run away to the circus to join your real mother?" It was my turn to flush. I'd forgotten I'd once told Ida about Madame Adeline. She was another childish dream. I remembered the roar of the crowd as we cantered around the ring, the sound of all those many pairs of hands clapping me. I stuck my head in the air. "I might just do that very thing," I said. "Oh, Hetty, as if that circus lady could possibly be your mother." "She could be. She practically said so," I said fiercely. I did not really believe it now, but I could not bear to let my last dream fade away. "You're getting a big girl now," said Ida, shaking her head. She'd rubbed a floury sprinkle over her cheeks, and her cap was awry, making her look foolish. "You're far too old for these silly daydreams. You got to be practical. Know your place. Work hard. Make something of yourself." "Like you mean?" I said spitefully. "You might not think much of my position, Miss High and Mighty, but it suits me perfectly," said Ida. "I worked hard, and I keep respectable, and I save my wages." "Yes, but What for? You do the same thing day after day, week after week, year after year. You must be mad, Ida. You don't have to stay here. You're not a foundling. You could walk out and get a job, a better job anywhere. I've got a good job here, and I was very lucky to get it too. Coming from the workhouse, said Ida. You're talking nonsense, Hetty. I know you must be missing Polly sorely, but there's no need to take it out on me. I've tried my best to cheer you up. I shall never be cheerful here. Never, 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 I declared. I simply could not stop myself. Ida was my only true friend left in the hospital, and yet I seemed determined to alienate her. I stayed rude and sulking all day, doing the barest minimum of work. Judging by today, I doubt you can even be a servant when you leave here, Miss Hetty, head in the air, Ida sniffed. No one in their right mind would take you on as a skivvy, let alone a cook. Now, are you going to snap out of it and be a good sweet girl tomorrow? I snapped my fingers and then presented her with my own glum face. Does it look like it? I said. Well, go away and stew, you stupid girl. I'll pick someone else to come and help me. As if I care, I said, and marched out of the kitchen. I cared dreadfully when Ida picked Sheila. I knew she'd done it deliberately to annoy me. Ida didn't like Sheila any more than I did. She just wanted to pay me back. It was bitterly painful to peep through the kitchen hatch and see Ida and Sheila stirring a vat of rice pudding together, laughing away. When Ida saw me looking, she popped a handful of raisins into Sheila's grinning mouth. She gave a little nod as if to say, that will show you, Hetty Feather. It showed me all right. It looked as if I'd lost my last friend at the hospital through my own stupid behaviour. I should have gone to Ida privately and apologised, but I was too proud. I stalked around by myself, dutifully keeping an eye on little Eliza, but otherwise taking no notice of anyone. I sat listlessly in the classroom, never bothering to answer a single question now. I felt so dull and slow, and I could scarcely lift my pen to write any words. I found my grades slipping. I had been first equal with Polly at everything, but now I was sliding down almost to the bottom of the class, along with Mad Jenny and Slow Frida and Stutter Mary, the three sad girls who could barely read and write. I tried even less with my household tasks. Every Sunday I daydreamed in chapel and ate my dinner stony-faced, staring down all the chattering ladies and gentlemen. There seemed no point in smiling. They would never pick me to be their new little adopted daughter. I was small, sour, red-haired Hetty Feather. I could not even get interested when everyone started talking about the Queen's Golden Jubilee in June. What did I care for our fat little monarch? Miss Morley's lessons became very focused on the royal personage. At long last, she used the coloured maps on the classroom wall, showing us all the different lands the Queen ruled over. When she told us the Queen was also Empress of India, half the class assumed she lived in that huge hot subcontinent. Miss Morley laughed at such ignorance. She said the Queen mostly lived here in London, at Buckingham Palace, and she would quite definitely be in London on the 23rd of June, the day of the Golden Jubilee. Miss Morley seemed utterly obsessed with Queen Victoria. She gave us dictation about our loyal sovereign. She told us the history of her 50-year reign. She even had us calculating how many seconds would tick by during the royal procession if it started at 11 and ended at 2. I assumed this was a specific obsession peculiar to Miss Morley, but it seemed to be shared by all the staff. Even little Eliza started babbling about our great Queen and showed me a picture that she'd drawn in an infant class. I admired it warily, though her Queen Victoria looked very fat, like a fat stag beetle with a crown upon its head. We even prayed for Queen Victoria in chapel on Sunday, which seemed to be a little bizarre. Why should all us foundlings, born in shame and destined to live our lives as servants, pray for such a fabulously rich and fortunate old woman who owned whole continents? She should surely be on her padded knees, praying for God's mercy for us. At the end of the service, Matron Bottomley marched to the front of the chapel and ascended the pulpit, her beaky nose pecking the air. She was smaller than the vicar, so only her head was in view, sticking up comically, like a coconut on a shy. I had such an urge to aim my hymn book at her. I have very important announcements to make. Children, she said, as you all know, our dear Queen has ruled over us for 50 wonderful years. Next Thursday is the day of the Golden Jubilee, when the whole country will celebrate her glorious reign. We are going to celebrate too. You have all been invited to a festive gathering at Hyde Park in London. You will be given a splendid meal at this venue and join in all kinds of fun and games, and then Her Majesty the Queen herself will come and greet you. There was a great ooh of excitement and astonishment, though perhaps we were more thrilled at the sound of the splendid meal and the fun and games than the prospect of seeing the Queen. I was excited too. I could not help it. We were going to escape the dreary hospital for a whole day. Oh, glory! Settle down now, children. You must be especially well behaved. Any child who is seriously surly or disobedient will not be included in the trip to see the Queen, said Matron Bottomley, and her ridiculous coconut head turned so that she was looking straight at me. Oh, I understand you very well, Matron Stinking Bottomley, I thought. It would give you such huge delight to be able to deny me my rights. How it would please you to declare before everyone that Hetty Feather was too wicked to attend the Jubilee celebrations. I smiled demurely back at Matron Bottomley. For once in my life, I wasn't stupidly going to cut off my nose to spite my face. My behaviour over the next few days was exemplary. I tried hard in lessons on Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday, but not so hard that my knowledge irritated Miss Morley. I meekly wrote down her exact words during dictation. I figured out each silly sum, finding how many days it would take Queen Victoria to sail to India if her mighty ship steamed along at a certain terrific rate of knots. I wrote a neat, unimaginative essay on what I should say should I meet Her Majesty the Queen. I had myself performing copious curtsies, simpering, "If you please, ma'am," repeatedly. Miss Morley gave me a big red tick and wrote excellent at the bottom of my page. She actually wrote excellent, but I decided not to point this out, as it had an A instead of an E. I sewed aprons exquisitely, using tiny stitches and turning each corner with a perfectly sewn double hem, as if I was making the finest robes for the royal household. I dusted every corridor and corner of the hospital, my feather duster reaching up to the picture rails and down to the wainscoting. I practically lined up every infant foundling and gave them a good dusting too. Oh, how irritated Matron Bottomley must have been when Thursday morning dawned bright and sunny, and there I was, smiling as good as gold. She was probably tempted to give me a slap for sheer cussedness. She did not have the imagination to invent some wicked misdemeanour on the spot. She simply gave me a hard poke in the back and said, "Mind your manners while you're out, Hetty Feather. All of London will be looking at us." We were all issued with clean clothes from top to bottom that Thursday, breaking with all known custom. Our caps and aprons and tippets were laundered and starched, so snowy white they looked brand new. Matron had had every big girl ironing all day Wednesday, when we'd all shuffled around in our stocking feet, while every big boy polished our boots. We were given bread and butter for our breakfast because the nurses were so fearful the little ones might spill their porridge down their crisp white chests. Every child had mouth and hands dabbed at with damp cloth after breakfast, and all the infants were forced into the privies and frightened into copious evacuations so that none would disgrace the hospital during our long outing. We were lined up in the playground like miniature brown army, boys one side, girls the other, in serried ranks of 6, from the littlest 5-year-old fresh from foster care to the biggest, blousiest girls about to leave to go into service. Matron Peters positioned herself at the front with the infants. Matron Bottomley brought up the rear with the big ones, while all the nurses and teachers patrolled up and down the lines. "Right, let us all step out and look lively. Remember, the entire reputation of the Foundling Hospital rests on you," Matron Bottomley bawled. We set off at a quick march. 1-2, 1-2, 1-2. It felt so extraordinary to go out of those iron gates and walk down the road. The very air smelled different, so clean and fresh and invigorating. London would have looked wondrous to us in thick fog, but this sparkling sunny June morning made every great grey building gleam palatially. Every window ledge was decked with bunting, every lamp-post embellished with bouquets, every flag flapping in the light breeze. We were told not to break step or loiter even for a second, though I craned my neck and stared when we were marched along Oxford Street, marvelling at the vast emporiums, their windows a wonder of patriotic red, white and blue decoration. I couldn't get used to the crowds. Such huge numbers of people, all shouting, laughing, screaming. Some of our little children started crying in sheer shock, and even I felt frightened, especially when we had to cross a vast road. There were policemen who held up the traffic for us, but they were only puny men. I did not see how they could control so many cabs and carriages and enormous omnibuses, but somehow we all crossed safely, hanging on to each other, our palms sweating. It was a long, long walk, and the little ones in front started dragging their feet and limping in their hard boots. But our spirits picked up as we passed the great marble arch and entered the park. There were 10 enormous marquees and many other smaller tents, as far as you could see. There were merry-go-rounds and helter-skelters and whirling chairs and swing-boats. Children ran around freely everywhere, climbing on the painted horses, sliding down the helter-skelter, squealing with fearful joy in the chairs and boats high above our heads. There were thousands and thousands of children, from tiny tots in pinafores to great girls and boys much taller than me. They were all wearing such wonderful clothes. Many of the girls were dressed in white, or soft flower colours, bluebell, primrose, lilac, or pale rose pink, skipping around in soft shoes. The boys wore jolly blue, and white sailor suits, with jaunty straw hats. They stared at all of us, in our ugly brown frocks and breeches, our silly caps and aprons, our red robin waistcoats and cumbersome jackets, our stiff stout boots. Some openly pointed and commented, "Look, look, it's the children from the institution." "Are they all orphans from the workhouse?" No, they're foundlings from the hospital. Don't they look quaint?" We stared back, still in our marching rows, red in the face from the heat and our humiliation. But then Matron Bottomley addressed us through a megaphone. "This is a message for the senior school. You are allowed to play in the fairground for an hour, so long as you stay within close proximity. All the rides are free, but everyone must report back to Marquee number 10 at 1 o'clock sharp for our festive luncheon. Do you all understand?" We gazed at her, barely able to take it in. Did she really mean we were free to roam as we wished? A few of the big boys made a dash for it before she could change her mind, but a lot of us wavered uncertainly. We were so used to having every minute accounted for, we did not know how to cope with an hour of freedom. Well, I could cope. I ran to the merry-go-round, circling it twice to select the finest horse. They all had names painted on their arched necks. I looked in vain for a Hetty, but I did find a Polly, a black and white steed, with a red saddle. I had to lift my skirts in an unladylike fashion to clamber onto her, but I didn't care. Some of the girls' riders were sitting demurely side-saddle, but that looked so silly and lopsided. I had ridden bareback with Madame Adeline. I knew what I was doing. The organ music struck up and the merry-go-round started turning. I clasped the gold rail and urged Polly forward. We went round and round until all the children blurred and the great green park seemed to be spinning on its axis like a giant globe. As I stepped off dizzily, I spotted Eliza looking a little dazed amongst a cluster of infants. They were being shepherded around by dear Nurse Winnie. I dashed over to her. "Can I take Eliza on the merry-go-round, Nurse Winterson?" "I promise I'll look after her most carefully," I said. "Yes, of course you can, Hetty," she said. She looked longingly at it. "For 2 pins I'd have a ride myself." I lifted Eliza onto a black horse with a white patch on its face. He was called Star. "You shall be a little star, Eliza," I told her. I thought she would be in ecstasy, but she shrieked when the merry-go-round started going faster. Don't like it, she cried, squirming around. "Let me get off, Hetty." "You can't get off, silly. You've only just got on. Don't be scared, Eliza. It's lovely." "No, it's not," Eliza said, shutting her eyes tight and clinging to me like a little monkey. When at last the merry-go-round slowed down, Eliza shot off to Nurse Winterson without a backward glance. I shrugged my shoulders, telling myself I was glad to be free of her. I saw my other sister, Martha, near the helter-skelter, and I went rushing over to her, worried that she'd fall trying to get up the steep steps inside. However, she had her 2 friends, Elizabeth and Marjorie, with her, and they elbowed me out of the way impatiently. "Martha's got us, Hetty," said Elizabeth. "She doesn't need you to help her. She says you fuss far too much," said Marjorie. Martha herself simply smiled at all of us, blinking behind her thick glasses. "Very well. Suit yourselves. That's perfectly fine with me," I said, sticking my nose in the air. I pretended to recognise someone in the great crowd and waved heartily. "There's my friend. I must go," I said, running off. I ran and ran, circling round all the fairground rides, not quite sure which to select. It felt so odd being all by myself, when everyone else seemed to be surrounded by friends. "Oh, Polly, if only you were here," I whispered. I knuckled my eyes because they were unaccountably wet, and then opened them wide, because right in front of me was a tall, dark boy in foundling uniform, nodding at me shyly. "Gideon," I said. "I came looking for you, Hetty," he said. I was overwhelmed that he had taken the trouble to seek me out. In the past, I had always been the one to run after him. "How are you, Gideon?" "I suppose I'm very well," he said solemnly. He spoke perfectly clearly and coherently, but with a hesitant, mannered air, as if he rarely opened his mouth. "Oh, Gideon, do you hate it at the hospital too?" I asked, clutching his arm. He blinked in alarm at my forward gesture, but nodded at me. "I dislike it very much, but I dread leaving it too. I do not want to be a soldier." "It's much, much better than being a servant, you silly boy. Think of the excitement in foreign lands and great battles." "Think of the fear and the blood and the hardship," said Gideon, shuddering. "I dream about it sometimes. I know I will not be able to bear it. I do not want to live my days in barracks and army camps. The other boys torment me here, but I'm sure it would be far worse living amongst men." "Then let us run away together, Gideon, and escape our fate." "You're still dreaming, Hetty. Don't tell me you're still planning to run back home to live with Jem so that he can take care of you." "No," I said shortly. "Not now. I will make my own way." "Well, that is good," he said, clearly humouring me. "We will make our way together. We are still special sister and brother," I declared. I spun him round and then focused on the fair. "Gideon, come on the swing boats with me. They're swinging so rapidly, "Think I shall be sick," said Gideon, but he came along with me obligingly. We crouched on either side of the boat, tugging hard on the ropes so that we swung up and then sharply down, as if we were riding in a stormy sea. I pictured the waves and the screaming seagulls and the wild wind as we tossed our way over the ocean to distant promised lands, gabbling this breathlessly to Gideon while he laughed at me. "You're still the same old Hetty," he said. "Oh, stop pulling so, we're going too high." "Let's go higher and higher and higher," I said, tugging with all my might. Gideon groaned and shut his eyes as the whole park heaved this way and that beneath us. But I stared out, seeing right over the huge marquees and the milling throng of children. Way over to the south of the park, beside the silver stream of the Serpentine, I saw another big striped tent, a cluster of wagons, and a great grey creature with a long waving trunk. "Oh, my lord, it's Elijah! It's the circus! Oh, Gideon, stop pulling! We must slow down!" "Don't fret. I want to slow down," said Gideon, weakly, his face greenish white. "It's so wonderful! The circus!" I babbled, clutching the edges of the swing boat to try to make it stop. "Hetty, you'll tip us both out," Gideon groaned. "Oh, stop your moaning, boy. Come on, we can jump out now. Whee!" I made a leap for the ground and landed lightly. Gideon jumped after me and landed on his hands and knees. "Ouch! Oh, goodness, I've torn my breeches." "Of course you haven't," I lied, pulling him up by the hands. "Come on, Gideon. I'm going to the circus, and this time I'm taking you with me." Chapter 18. "We can't go to the circus, Hetty," said Gideon. "It's not within close proximity. It couldn't possibly be further away." "Oh, for heaven's sake, who cares?" I said gaily. "But it's nearly 1 o'clock. We have to be back at marquee number 10. Didn't you listen to what the matron said?" "As if I care what matron stinking Bottomley says," I said. "Come on, Gideon. Here's your chance to see the circus for yourself at long last. Don't you want to see Elijah close up? And wondrous Madame Adeline and her horses? And remember the boy acrobats and their sparkly silver clothes? Don't you want to see them?" Gideon did waver then, looking longingly in the direction of the circus, though we couldn't even see the tip of the tent or the top of Elijah's trunk now that we were down on the ground. "And it won't cost a penny this time. Everything is free today because of the Jubilee. Come on, Gideon." "We will miss our meal in the tent," said Gideon. "Never mind. Maybe we'll be back in time to snatch at something. But we'll get into such trouble. There are so many of us, I don't think anyone will notice there are 2 foundlings too few. And even if they do find out, what will we care? We will have seen the circus." "You would care if you were a boy, Hetty. If we are very bad, we get whipped. Listen, I've been so fearfully bad I got locked up without food or water in the bleak attic for days and days," I said, exaggerating slightly. "I'm going to go to the circus now, even if they lock me in the attic for the rest of my life. And so are you, Gideon." I tugged at his arm, but he pulled away. "I can't, Hetty. I simply daren't. You go, if you must, but I do so hope you won't get into trouble." I stared at his pale, obstinate face and knew there was no way I could persuade him. "All right, I shall go by myself," I said. I gave him a kiss on his white cheek. "You will kick yourself for not coming with me." I ran off in what I hoped was the right direction. I looked over my shoulder to see if Gideon might just be wavering, but he'd already been swallowed up by the crowd. "Oh, Gid," I said, and even though I was sure he couldn't see me, I waved to him. Then I ran off to find the circus by myself. Though it was hard to work out which way to go. The crowd was so thick, I had to dodge and weave and dart between folk wherever I could. Troops of children were gathering and marching towards the marquees for their festive meal. My stomach was rumbling. I couldn't help wondering just how festive the meal would be. Perhaps cake, jellies, but I couldn't lose my huge chance of sheer greed. People were peering at me strangely, laughing at my bizarre uniform. I quickly took my cap off and stuffed it down my tippet, but I had no way of hiding the rest of my clothes. A formidable woman with an official badge pinned to her bosom seized hold of me. "Aren't you one of the foundling childs? From the hospital?" No, my child, you're going entirely the wrong way." She consulted a list. "You're due in marquee number 10. That way." "Yes, ma'am," I said, spinning around and walking the way she pointed, but within seconds she was out of sight, so I could turn and fight my way back in the direction of the circus. It took me a good half hour before I was even near. I was so hot my frock was sticking to my back and some small child had smeared his hokey-pokey ice all over my skirts. My cap had edged its way out of my tippet and was now lost, ground under heel by hundreds of feet. But when I spied the red and purple tip of the striped circus tent, I forgot all about my bedraggled appearance. I pushed forward determinedly, so eager now I was nearly running. I saw Elijah standing tethered to a pole, wearing a headdress of gold in honour of the Queen. He was smaller than I remembered, but of course I'd been much smaller when I last saw him. The crowd was even thicker now that I was near the circus. and many small boys pushed and shoved. When I pushed and shoved back, one little monster kicked me hard in the shins. I kicked back harder, though, for once in my life thankful for my stout institution boots, though my feet were hot as hell inside them. I got nearer and saw a tower of acrobats standing on each other's heads, but they weren't dressed in silver, they were all in red. Of course, those tumbling boys in silver spangles would have new costumes now, and perhaps their younger brothers had joined their act. I pushed my way through the entrance into the tent. It was boiling like a cauldron, packed with children keen to see the free show. I barged my way along the front row to claim the only empty seat. There were clowns running backwards and forwards, throwing buckets of water around. It all seemed a familiar routine, and I laughed hysterically, even though I did not really find them funny. Then I heard a neigh and a thud of hooves, and I tingled all over and cried out in joy. But where was Pirate, the pale grey with the black patch? These horses were all a glossy chestnut brown, with purple plumes in their manes. And who was this? 2 women, with big chests and fat thighs, in tight violet-spangled dresses, with huge floppy purple bows stuck in their hair, one blonde, one dark. Where was Madame Adeline? These 2 dumpy impostors rode around and round the ring. Their act was a travesty compared to Madame Adeline's. Surely they could not have taken her place. I knew every turn she'd taken, every trick, every toss of her beautiful red hair. I had pictured it so many hundreds of times inside my head. These 2 purple fools galloped around monotonously, waving their hands for applause. I could not bear to clap them. I clasped my hands in agony. When they cantered out of the ring at last, I pushed my way back along the row and elbowed my way to the entrance, taking no notice of the mutters in my wake. I clutched hold of a circus hand, giving out flyers for the circus. "Where is Madame Adeline?" I demanded. "When will she be performing?" "Madame who?" said the man. "Never heard of her." "Madame Adeline and her troop of horses," I said. "She's the star of the circus." "No, she ain't. The only horse act we've got is Miss Molly and Miss Polly, the equestrian twins. You just missed them," he said impatiently. "Now leave me alone, girlie. I've got a job to do." He gave me one of his flyers and turned away from me. I stared down at the strip of paper in my hand. Mr. Jeffrey's Wondrous Whirligig Circus, it said, in big bold italics at the top of the page. I blinked at it, even rubbing the words with my finger as if I could reassemble them into any order that made sense. Who was this Mr. Jeffrey? This was Tanglefield's Travelling Circus. I was sure that was the right name. But I wavered as I slid my eyes down the list of performers. Miss Lizzie's Troop of Baboons, Mr. Lionel Luck, Contortionist, the Zebedee Family of Tumblers. I had not heard of any of them. And then, in bold lettering, Archibald the Infant Elephant. What were they talking about? I knew the elephant was called Elijah. I could not have remembered it all so inaccurately. "Why has the circus changed so?" I asked the circus hand desperately, shaking his striped sleeve. "Why isn't it called Tanglefield's Travelling Circus any more? Why are there all these new people? Why has Elijah's name been changed? And where is Madame Adeline? You must have heard of her." "Will you stop pestering me? I've got a job to do. Can't you read, child?" He tapped his wad of flyers impatiently. "It's there, plain as the nose on your face. Does it say Tanglefield's Travelling Circus? No, it does not. This is Mr. Jeffrey's gaff, and he'll have my guts for garters if he catches me chatting. He's a sharp man, Mr. Jeffrey, never one to miss an opportunity. This is better than a 10-foot advertisement on a hoarding. Now, on your way. Ain't all you kids meant to be having a free nosh, little girlie? Oh, my Lord, don't start crying on me. I can't abide it when kiddies cry." I was weeping in sheer frustration, still too stunned to understand. The circus hand sighed. "I reckon Tanglefield's will be up on the heath. I hear they've got all the ragtag and bobtail circuses up there." I stared at him. "You mean there are different circuses?" "There must be thousands, if you count all over Europe and America too. I was once part of the Great Fernando's Travelling Circus in the States. Now that was a gaff and a half. We start our procession with 20 elephants. 20! I tell you. And 2 miles later you come to the very last animal wagon. How about that? I'll wager this Tanglefield's Travelling Circus you hold so dear couldn't hold a candle to that." "Do you really think they'll be on this heath?" I asked. "Without doubt," he said. "Hampstead Heath, that's the one." "Where's that, sir?" "Oh, for goodness sake, what do you want of me now, a map? You hop off home and get your pa to take you." I hopped off. I didn't have a home and I didn't have a pa. I would have to find Hampstead Heath by myself. I'd never have another chance to find Madame Adeline. It took me a very long time to fight my way out of the heaving park. I didn't battle back towards the big marquees, just in case someone from the hospital spotted my brown dress amid the froth of fancy frocks. I followed the shimmer of the Serpentine instead. I marvelled at all the boats on the water, longing to have a go at rowing myself up and down, but I had more pressing purpose. I caught hold of a kindly-looking lady in charge of a bunch of small children. If you please, Mum, can you tell me the way to Hampstead Heath? Well, let me see now. I believe it's over in that direction. She gestured vaguely. But it's a very long way off. Too far for a little girl. Where is your school party, child? Are you lost? Oh, no, Mum. They're over there, I said quickly, and edged away before she could question me further. My heart sank a little at her words. A very long way off. I was so very hot and starving hungry now, and my boots were pinching dreadfully. But I was still resolved. I would get to Tanglefield's travelling circus and find Madame Adeline, even if I had to crawl there on my knees. It was scarcely any easier making my way when I was out of the park gates. The streets were so crowded that I had to scurry along in the gutter, though I trembled every time a cow or carriage drove close, terrified of the iron-shod hoofs of the horses. I walked along the wide, grand road of Piccadilly. The crowds were thicker than ever. Then there was a clamour and a cheer, and everyone surged forward, teetering at the edge of the pavement, nearly tumbling on top of me. Up you come, little 'un, said a perfectly strange man, picking me up before I could protest and perching me on his shoulder. There now, you're safe with me? See them coming? My, you'll be able to tell your grandchildren one day that you had a grand view of Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee procession. I saw many red-coated soldiers with white-plumed helmets riding horses, and then a black open carriage drawn by 6 grey horses, very fine, but not a patch on Madame Adeline's. A small fat woman sat in the carriage looking dazed, waving her plump little hand mechanically. There now, you've seen the Queen, said the gentleman. Thank you very much, sir, I said, though I wanted to see Madame Adeline so much more. Would you say I am nearly at Hampstead Heath now? What's that? You're nowhere near, silly child. There now, don't look so disappointed. You've seen the Queen, God bless her. Yes, sir, thank you, sir. Could you set me down now, please, sir? I said. I started walking as soon as he put me down. It was hard to progress with the crowd thick as treacle, still cheering, chanting, singing songs. Some of the younger ladies were lifting their skirts and dancing. I struggled on, asking every kind face if I was going the right way to the Heath, but they either did not know or told me it was too far a journey for a little girl like me. I was so tired and out of breath I could barely speak, but when I tugged the sleeve of maybe the 50th lady and asked if she could tell me the way to Hampstead Heath, she smiled at me merrily. Yes, indeed, dearie. Don't she look like a sparrow in her brown stuff frock, Desmond? She nudged her companion, a red-faced young man with a ridiculous whiskers. Yes, little sparrow, Desmond and I are going there too. There's a big funfair and a circus. Oh, pray tell me, is it Tanglefield's travelling circus? I asked desperately. I don't rightly know, my dear. I fancy there are all sorts up on the Heath. You're a quaintly spoken child. Isn't she sweet, Desmond? The lady nudged him, and he nodded obligingly. She's a dear little thing, Rebecca, though you are even dearer, said Desmond. Rebecca nudged him and laughed again. They seemed so taken with me that I dared ask. If you are going to Hampstead Heath, might I possibly walk with you? We're not walking, child, she said, bursting into peals of laughter, especially not when I'm wearing these heels. We're taking the omnibus at Tottenham Court Road. You can come with us by all means. I went with them, though I thought Rebecca very silly and simpering, and I did not care for whiskery Desmond either. I knew omnibuses cost money, and I had none, but as I'd hoped, Desmond paid the pennies for my fare, scarcely seeming to give it a thought. Thank you kindly, sir, I said. Do you think we might go upstairs? Of course we can, little sparrow, said Rebecca. Desmond, get them to make way for us. The omnibus was already so crowded we were all squashed hip to hip, but Rebecca managed to manoeuvre me right to the front so that I could peer out. It was wondrous to have a bird's-eye view of everything, almost as if I truly was a sparrow. I stared down at all the hats and bonnets below me, and then in the distance saw a long line of little white caps. Oh, my lord, surely it couldn't be the foundlings on their long march back to the hospital. I asked Rebecca the time, and she got Desmond to produce his big gold watch from his waistcoat pocket. 4:15. I felt faint. I had lost all sense of time. I thought I might somehow manage to rush back to Hyde Park and join up with all the others for the march back, but now it was clearly much too late. Had they counted every foundling at marquee number 10? Did Matron Bottomley realise I was missing? She would be so angry. I thought of the punishment attic and shuddered. I could not go back to the hospital now, without quite meaning to. I had run away at last. The omnibus took us northwards, and I clutched the rail of the bus, my heart beating hard. Rebecca addressed me every now and then and I said, yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am, scarcely taking in what she was saying. My eyes were open, but I'd stopped focusing on the sights of London. I was praying fervently inside my head. Please let me find Tanglefield's travelling circus. Please let me find Madame Adeline. Oh, please, please, please let her somehow really be my mother so that I can live with her. The air grew fresher and the streets less crowded. I glimpsed green fields and many trees. I was reminded of the only real home I'd ever known. "Is this the countryside?" I said wonderingly. "This is the start of the heath, little sparrow, and look, there's the fun fair right over there." I saw it spread out across the heath, more merry-go-rounds and helter-skelters, coconut shies and shooting games with all kinds of swings, but I scarcely gave them a glance. I saw several big striped circus tents. "Thank you so much," I said as we all tumbled down off the omnibus. "Don't you want to come on the rides with us, little sparrow? You shouldn't wander around by yourself. There's all sorts here today," said Rebecca. "Oh, no, thank you. I'll be all right. I'm meeting someone here," I said. "Someone very special." "Ah, isn't she lovely, Desmond? Who is it, little sparrow? You're surely too young to have a sweetheart already." "It's my mother," I blurted out, and then I rushed away from them. I ran towards the nearest tent, so agitated that I tripped and nearly went sprawling. "Please, please, please let it be Tanglefields, and please, please, please let me find her." I gabbled it out, loud this time, not caring if folks stared at me. I saw some words on a big placard. "This way to the great Tanglefields Travelling Circus." Perhaps I was imagining the words because I wanted to see them so badly. I knew all along that there was only a chance that Tanglefields would be here on the heath. They could be at any town or village in the whole of Britain. I blinked to get the words properly in focus. Oh, glory! It really did say Tanglefield. "Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you," I gabbled, nearly sick with excitement. I ran nearer. I saw Elijah tethered behind the tent, the real Elijah, truly vast and more weirdly wrinkled than ever, his great ears in the air, trunk waving. I had found my circus, and now I just had to find Madame Adeline, and all my dreams would come true. The flap on the circus tent was closed. A notice declared, "Next performance at 5:30. I couldn't wait that long. I dodged around the tent, nervously skirted Elijah, and timidly knocked on the nearest wagon. An old man came to the door in just his undershirt and trousers, his braces flapping. "What do you want, missy?" he said, frowning at me. There were traces of red on his nose and around his mouth. You're Chino the clown," I said. "No, I'm not. Not when I'm taking my break. Now be off with you. I need my 40 winks." "I'm sorry to disturb you, Mr. Chino. It's just, I must see Madame Adeline. It's very urgent. Oh, please tell me she's still with the circus. Madame Adeline and her 6 ponies. "Well, she can barely run to 2 now. She's a bit down on her luck, our Addie. Past it, if you ask me, but the circus is in her blood. You know how it is." "The circus is in my blood too," I said grandly. "I'll thank you not to talk disparagingly of Madame Adeline. I am related to her." "Are you now?" he said, peering at me doubtfully. "Well, she's over in the wagon at the end, the green one with the stars on the door, but she'll likely be taking a nap and won't be too happy to be disturbed." "She'll want to see me," I said. I had to believe it. I had no other dreams left. I said it so passionately that the clown believed me too. "Go and knock at her door then," he said, squinting at me. Maybe I can see a likeness." I walked over to the green wagon, trembling now. I reached up and knocked timidly on the door. It was painted all over with silver stars. My little star. I waited. Perhaps I'd been too timid. I knocked harder. Rat-a-tat-tat. I heard a murmur inside. Someone shouted crossly, "For pity's sake, who is it?" My throat was so dry I could barely call out. "It's me, Hetty Feather," I mumbled. The door opened and an old lady with sparse grey hair peered out at me. She was wearing a pale green silk dressing gown, rather grubby and stained, and scuffed slippers on her splayed feet. Oh dear Lord, I'd gone to the wrong wagon. "Who did you say? Hetty Feather? What do you want, child?" she asked, rubbing her eyes irritably. Her hair was all awry at the back, and she combed it with her fingers when she saw me looking. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. I did not mean to disturb you. I'm looking for Madame Adeline," I whispered. "And why is that?" she demanded. She held the door, looking as if she might slam it in my face. It was time to be blunt. "Because I think I might be her daughter," I said. The old woman blinked at me. "What?" I licked my lips and repeated it. She stood staring at me, shaking her head in astonishment. "Well, you'd better come inside," she said at last, beckoning to me. I climbed the steps to her wagon and walked in through the starry door. It was like a real little room inside. There was a green velvet upholstered chair with a little antimacassar and a little table covered with a fringed chenille cloth. A cabinet crammed with china ornaments stood in a corner, though she must have had to wrap and store every one of her treasures while travelling. I spotted a little bed with rumpled covers let down like a shelf from the wagon wall. I peered at it, thinking Madame Adeline must indeed be taking a nap, but there was no head on the pillow, no body beneath the sheets. "Sit down, child," said the old woman, indicating a padded footstool beside the chair. She set a silver kettle on top of a spirit stove and fetched 2 willow-patterned china cups and saucers. She then produced a slab of cake, checkered pink and yellow sponge, coated with thick marzipan. My mouth watered. I had had no lunch at all, and I was starving hungry. The old woman looked at my face and cut a large slice of cake. "You look as if you need it," she said. "Oh, I do. And it's such lovely cake too, but may I meet Madame Adeline first?" The old woman smiled strangely. There was something familiar about her smile. Could she be Madame Adeline's mother, and therefore my very own grandmother? "Are you perhaps recognising me now?" she said. I shifted uncertainly. "Maybe this will help you," she said, shuffling in her down-at-heel slippers over to a wooden cabinet. She opened the doors to display a little dressing table with a large mirror. There was also a bright red head of hair balanced on a stand. "My wig," she said, and she picked it up and carefully positioned it over her own grey locks. "Tra-la!" she said, raising her arms in an ironic flourish. "Madame Adeline herself." I stared at her. She still looked like an old woman in spite of her bright hair. "You will have to imagine the grease paint and the costume for now. I'm not getting ready for the show just yet," she said. "You are really Madame Adeline?" I gasped. "Your obvious astonishment is not very flattering, child," she said, yawning. "Strange that you didn't recognise your own mother." She laughed a little. I felt my face flaming. She bent down beside me, suddenly gentle. "Whatever put a strange fancy into your head like that?" she asked. "You said I was your little star," I said. "Did I? You came to our village and picked me out from all the other children, and I rode on Pirate with you," I whispered. "Oh, my dear Pirate," she said, sighing. "He broke his leg 3 years ago. He had to be destroyed, and it nearly broke my heart. I've never had another horse like him, so I came to your village long ago." 5 years. You must have been very young then, and yet you remembered it so vividly. How old are you now? About 8? I'm nearly 11, ma'am. "So, why did you fancy I was your mother? Don't you have a mother of your own?" "No, I don't. I'm a foundling. I've never known who she is, but I just thought, as you were so kind to me and we look a little alike, and we both have such red hair, well, so I thought. I just so hoped." I was crying now, gulping with great ugly sobs. "Oh dear Hetty, you poor little creature." She bent down and put her arms around me. I smelled her own sweet powdery smell and howled. She held me close, rocking me as if I was a baby. Her baby. I cried all over her green silk dressing gown, but she didn't seem to mind. "There now, you poor love," she said when at last my sobs slowed. She lifted me up and sat me in her own armchair, and then poured me a cup of tea and gave me the big slab of cake. I ate and drank with gusto in spite of my sadness. As I munched my excellent cake, she cut me another slice as soon as the thirst vanished. She coaxed me to tell my story. She laughed with me when I described my antics with Jem back in the village. She looked as if she might cry herself when I told her about the miseries and humiliations at the hospital. "You poor little pet. No wonder you had such a strange fancy, but I'm still bewildered that I made such a strong impression on you, that you remembered me all this time." "Of course I remember." I looked at her imploringly. "Don't you remember me, your little star?" I saw her hesitate. I realised in that moment that I must have been one of many, many, many little stars. Perhaps she picked a little child from every performance. How could she possibly remember among so many? "Of course I remember you," she said quickly, but I knew she was lying to save my feelings. "The very little girl with the flame-red hair. Yes, you were indeed a little star, and yes, in the ring, we must have looked like a real mother and daughter. But you're absolutely certain that I'm not your daughter," I blurted out. "Oh dear Hetty, I wish I could pretend, but no, I'm absolutely certain you are not my daughter. Though, rest assured, if you were, I should never have given you up to the foundling hospital, no matter what my circumstances. I would have dearly loved a baby." She bent her head, biting her thin lips. "I cannot have children. There was an accident when I was a child myself. I fell while training one day, and one of the horses galloped over me and kicked me violently in the stomach. I was told it was my own fault. I should have remembered to curl up to protect myself. My womb was ruptured, and I could not ride again for more than a year." She held her stomach now, as if it still hurt her. "Can't we pretend, Madame Adeline? Can't we make out to everyone that I really am your daughter? Chino the clown believed me, I'm certain. You could train me up, and I could ride with you, and I'd take care of the horses and look after you. I could sew your costumes, anything. Dear Hetty, I've never had such a dear, kind, tempting offer, but the circus is no life for a child. There's such hardship, such struggle, such pain. I've seen tiny children of 3 and 4 screaming as they're bent in two, their limbs twisted this way and that by their own parents to crick them into the right kind of bendiness for an acrobat act. It's especially no life for girls, with all the men leering at their brief costumes in the ring. Terrible things happen, Hetty, terrible things. No, you must go back to your hospital, and try to be a good girl so you don't get punished any more. I can't go back. Oh, please let me stay with you. Dear child, I wouldn't be allowed to keep you. Folk would say I'd have abducted you. They would fear for your moral welfare here in the circus, and rightly so. No, after the show I will accompany you back to the hospital myself. She looked at a brass clock ticking on a shelf. I must start getting ready now. Do you want to watch me one more time? Yes, of course. I thought she might send me out of the wagon while she got ready, but she let me stay to watch her transforming herself. She sat before her mirror, placed the great red wig back on its stand, and tied her own ruffled wisps back under a kerchief. Then she applied grease paint to her pale face, a thick white with bright pink on her cheeks. She put blue on her lids and outlined her eyes with black kohl, and then set her lips in a strange thin smile so she could fill them with carmine paint. She went behind a screen, took off her dressing gown, and put on her pink-spangled dress and white tights. I heard her sighing and groaning as she struggled into the tight costume and squeezed her swollen feet into little pink ballet shoes. And then she emerged self-consciously and carefully put the red wig back on her head. She stood before me, my Madame Adeline, ready to pass muster in the circus ring, though now, close up, I could still see the lines on her face under the thick makeup, the sadness of her eyes beneath her blue lids, the sag of her ageing body in the unforgiving costume. I felt a fierce protective love for her, as if she was truly my mother. You look beautiful, Madame Adeline, I lied. She gave me a kiss on the cheek and then went to wipe the smudge of carmine away, but I protected it with my hand, wanting to wear the marks of my kiss with pride. She slipped her green dressing gown around her shoulders and took me to the entrance of the tent. Open now, with people pouring in to see the show. Make sure this child gets a good seat, she said to one of the circus hands. I will come and collect her after the show to take her back home. She went off with one last wave to me. I sat in the front waiting tensely, while the audience chatted and chewed food and started calling out impatiently for the show to start. Then Chino came capering into the ring, followed by his clown friend Beppo. Everyone laughed at their foolish antics, but now that I knew Chino was just a sad old man doing his job, I could not find him funny. I did not even enjoy it when he ran rings around Elijah the elephant and performed the clockwork mouse trick. I could not marvel at Elijah either as he wearily performed each plodding trick, his skin sagging, his tiny eyes half blinded by the bright flare of gaslight. I watched the lady walking the tightrope, grown very plump, though she was still as nimble dancing up in the air. I saw the silver-suited tumbling boys, 3 of them now, one as small as me. I wished Gideon was with me to see them leap and cartwheel. I saw the gentleman throwing daggers at the lady, the seals clapping their flippers, the man eating fire. It was as if they were all phantoms in a dream. I had pictured them vividly so many times, glorifying everything, so that now their real act seemed a dull disappointment. Now, ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, Tanglewood's Travelling Circus is proud to present Madame Adeline and her rosin-backed performing horses. I sat up straight, fists clenched, scarcely able to bear the tension. Madame Adeline came cantering in on a piebald pony, another following close behind. The two horses stepped in time to the music, sometimes hesitating and missing the beat. They were old now, their manes yellow-grey, their flanks sunken. Madame Adeline stood up on their back of the lead horse, straight and proud as ever, smiling with her carmine lips. I watched her perform every trick, leaping precariously from one horse to another, swinging her legs, standing on her hands, jumping through hoops, my heart in my mouth in case she slipped. "Hello, children," she called. "Who would like to come and ride with me?" She looked straight at me and beckoned. I had to go to her. I felt foolishly conspicuous in my ugly brown frock. Small though I was clearly the eldest child scrambling into the ring. Madame Adeline smiled at me and helped me up onto the first piebald horse, swinging herself up after me. We trotted round the ring while everyone clapped. "Shall we perform properly for them, Hetty?" Madame Adeline murmured into my hair. "Yes, yes." Madame Adeline clucked and our horse, gathered speed, galloped round and round the ring while I grabbed his mane and dug my knees in hard to keep my balance. "Your star turn now," said Madame Adeline. "Time to stand up." It was much harder now than that I was taller and Madame Adeline not so strong. I wobbled precariously, trying desperately to keep my boots connected with the horse's back. I could only manage a split second before I collapsed back onto the horse with a bump, though everyone still clapped. We slowed down and I scrambled off inelegantly, terrified that folk would see I wore no drawers. Madame Adeline held my hand and we took our bow together. "Well done, dear Hetty," she whispered. "Watch the rest of the show and then I'll come for you to take you back." I smiled and nodded at her. But after she'd left the ring, I stood up and sidled my way along the road to the end. I slipped out of the tent. "Goodbye, dear Madame Adeline," I whispered, blowing a kiss in the direction of her wagon. I could not return to the hospital and the terrible punishment attic. I had run away forever. I had to fend for myself now. And that is where we will leave part 8 of Hetty Feather by Jacqueline Wilson. I'll be back soon with the next part of this fantastic story and lots more stories and videos coming your way very soon. If you'd like to subscribe or hit a like, that's always appreciated. Thanks for listening, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.